Hello, my name's Roisin, and happy Galentines Day! Hello friends, and welcome back to my channel. So I think that the day you're seeing this, it is actually the day before Galentine's Day, which is the 13th of February. According to my brief internet research, this started with Parks and Rec, but I don't really know if they just popularised it. But I thought that since tomorrow is a day that people have started to celebrate female friendships, I would do the same thing on my channel and talk to you about 10 books which feature really great female friendships. Some of these relationships are a bit complicated or difficult, as female friendships and indeed all human interaction can be, but I really enjoy books that explore the idea of women's relationships with one another, including romantic relationships, but not limited to them. I feel like a lot of the time on television and in film, as explained by the fact that hardly anything passes the Bechdel test, female friendships haven't been explored that much. And when they have, they are often very competitive, which, as someone who went to an all-girls school, is really not my experience at all. So instead, we're going to celebrate some beautiful, complicated, wonderful female friendships throughout literature. The first book on my list is one that I have loved since I was coming of age myself, and that is I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith. This is a book written in the 1930s that tells the story of a family that live in a semi-ruined castle. The father, who is a famous writer, rented on a romantic whim, but since he has stopped publishing books, the family slowly runs out of money. When the landlord passes away and his estate moves the hands of his two American grandsons, they arrive and the family meet them, and there's a lot of antics that ensue. But the main focus of this book is actually the family, and more particularly the two sisters, Rose and Cassandra. And this is the female friendship that I think is really at the heart of this book. These two sisters have lived in a castle kind of away from a lot of society. It's in the English countryside. They've lived a very different life with a father who is a writer and a mother who passed away. And their father remarried an artist's model who likes to get naked a lot. It's definitely a very funny, silly, quirky book for people who are fans of things like Jane Austen or My Family and Other Animals. I think there's definitely that sort of silly, very English vibe to the book. But it is also a little more melancholy, a little more complicated, the psychology in these books. These girls are getting to know themselves and who they are as adults, moving into the idea of romantic relationships and what their future could be. Their only experience of romantic relationship has been through reading things like Jane Austen, and so they are very outside of the world, but really it is about how they move away from and then back to each other. And I really love their friendship in this book, and their difficulty with each other and the way they fight with each other I think is really realistic. I'm not someone who has a sister myself, so I can't say perfectly, but I think for female friendship it definitely seems very true and heartwarming. So next on my list is Queenie by Candice Cartie Williams, a completely different type of book. This is a piece of women's contemporary fiction that came out, I believe, in 2019 and was incredibly popular for very good reason. It explores the life of Queenie and her experience being a 25-year-old woman living in London, struggling with her career and with her mental health. She has had some trauma in her past, and and at the beginning of the book she has been broken up with by the boyfriend that she thought was going to propose to her, and it kind of sends her into a bit of a spiral, and it explores her relationship with sex, but also her relationship with friends and her relationship with her different friends and the way that those different people interact with her, particularly in relation to her friendship with white women and her friendship with black women from where she grew up, as opposed to the women she went to university with, kind of the differences in class and race and how those intersect with her friendships. The story is definitely very much focused on Queenie and her own mental health journey, but I do think that the female friendships play a big and really important role in the book in general. And it was really interesting to see a group of female friends and the complexities of that relationship. Next is another classic, and that is Anne of Green Gables, or the entire Anne of the Island series. I haven't read the whole thing, but I've read I think 4 or 5 of the books, and I love all of them. This tells the story of Anne, an orphan girl who moves to Prince Edward Island in order to help Matthew and Marilla on their farm. They think they're getting a boy, they end up getting a girl, and it's kind of about her exploits. Anne is a hugely imaginative child and a young adult who is very intelligent, very determined, and also gets herself into all sorts of ridiculous scrapes. But throughout it all, she meets various different women with whom she forms intense bonds. When she's younger, there is Diana Barry, Perry, with whom she forms a bosom friendship. And the two girls have lots of adventures and imagination, and there are also other girls at the same time. But it is when she is older, because Diana is not as driven and academic as Anne, and so she moves to university. But as she gets older, she also meets other women like Stella Gibbons and also Leslie Moore, and has intense, close relationships with these women. Leslie Moore helps her to move beyond some tragedy that she experiences in her own life, and it is a really powerful friendship. Another book that, of course, focuses on a lot of different female relationships is Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo, a series of interconnected stories of 12 people, mostly women, mostly black, mostly growing up in Britain. And it explores lots of different female friendships from lots of different angles. What's really good about this book is that you experience things from one perspective, and then in the next chapter it will be a similar relationship, the same relationship, or another perspective on that relationship, an outsider. And so you can see things from all different angles. You can see how people understand one another, but also how things get lost in translation. Because of the way that it follows so many different people throughout Britain, you get to see a lot of different friendships, a lot of different forms of friendships, people of different ages and generations, all the way from people born in like the early 19th century to very young Gen Z people and their relationships with each other. And so if you want a book that encompasses lots of different types of female friendships, I think Girl, Woman, Other is perfect for that. I also think that If I Had Your Face by Frances Cha is a really interesting look at female friendships. It follows 5 women in South Korea, although we only hear from the perspective of 4 of them. They live in Seoul, and it is a lot about their experience of sexism and of the pressures to look a certain way, to get plastic surgery, but also the pressures on marrying, having children, of being the right kind of person. These women are from different class backgrounds and are having different experiences at the time. So it explores things from orphanages and sex work in Korea, and also like the high-flying super elite. But there is definitely a focus on friendship, and the ending of this book I think really ties together that of the major themes, these women's relationships with one another and how they can relate to each other even through a society that's kind of pitching them against one another, and why their experiences have been so disparate. It's written in such a like sly, cutting, kind of sarcastic, satirical way almost, but the warmth that comes from this book comes from these women's relationships with each other. And so I think it's definitely a great example of female friendship. Also on my list, another classic is Little Women, and the friendships between the 4 sisters, the 4 March sisters, Meg, Jo, Amy and Beth, who are all very different girls despite growing up in the same household. The books are about their struggles, their coming of age, their foibles, the things that they have struggled with, Jo's temper, Amy's pride, and the way that those things cause them to butt up against one another, and also to butt up against the constrictions of the 1860s society in which they live. It tells the story of them from when they are children up until adulthood, and their relationships, they're moving away from their family home, and their tragedies and tribulations as things go on. We see how these friendships and relationships are tested when the girls want different things, when Meg wants to get married and stay at home, when Jo has ambitions to be something, be a writer, be bigger than what she feels like society wants from her, when Amy talks about wanting to marry rich, and when Beth just wants a quiet life, how this tests their relationships with each other, but also how they come back together and really lean on one another and on their mother as well. I think it is a really beautiful, warm, cosy book, although there is definitely tragedy in it as well. Another book that you might not immediately think has a strong female friendship in it, but one that I think where the female friendship sticks with you, is The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry. This tells the story of a woman, Cora, whose abusive husband has recently died, and so she has become obsessed with natural history. And here's the story of this serpent terrorising the Essex coast. So she, her son, who is coded as autistic, and her maid travel to Essex, and they end up meeting this rector and his wife, and Cora and the rector have a kind of combative, obsessive relationship with each other, and there is also a heart surgeon who really wants to marry Cora now that she is single again. And so whilst you might think it is more about the things that happen in this small town, the mass hysteria there, that is certainly part of it. Also the science versus faith and the relationship between Cora and these other men in her life are also a big part of it. But Martha and Cora's relationship, and also Cora's relationship with the vicar's wife, whose name I can't remember, they are, I think, a very key important part of driving the plot, and are a very interesting way of showing a slightly different look on Victorian relationships between women of different classes, and between women of different experiences and prospects. Those friendships and those powerful love for one another really do really tie the book together, and I think are a very important part of the plot. And so it's definitely a different look at friendship to some of the others here, and it is not the main part of the book, but I think that it adds a lot to the book, especially in relation to some of the tragedy that we know has caused the mass hysteria to happen through this small town. Another piece of historical fiction in which I think that female friendships are very much at the forefront is The Mercies by Kiran Millwood Hargrave. This tells the story of a small town in Finnmark in the north of Norway, where in the 17th century, where during a storm, most of the men who live on the island are killed, and the women have to learn to fend for themselves. Not trusting this island, a man is sent to watch over them, and it takes place during a time when witchcraft and witch hunts were a very big part of the Norwegian, history. As this is an island just of women, obviously female relationships come to the fore. Not all of these relationships are good, and we can see cliques forming and people being part of the in-group and being part of the out-group based on beliefs of who belongs. It's because there is the persecution of the Sami people is part of the story, and also because suspicion starts to turn among this small community. But there is the strength of female friendship and bonds between women. There is queer love in this book, but there is also a lot of strong friendship, especially between the main character Maren and one of the strong women of the group, Kirsten. Their relationship as friends is really strong, and then also Maren and Ursa, their relationship is also a key part of this book. It's really a very slow moving book where no one really expresses themselves very clearly, which is something that I love in fiction. I never want people to talk about their feelings because it just makes me cringe. A lot of the time I feel like it's really badly written. So I love that these people show their feelings, but they never ever talk about them. And I think that it's done in such a strong, powerful way, and it really shows how complex female relationships can be. Like, they're not this perfect best friends thing, but they're also not just competitive, angry with each other, backstabbing all the time. They can be both at the same time. And I think it's a really good portrayal of that in fiction. One that is about female friendships in tragic situations is How We Disappeared by Jing Lee. This story is split over dual timelines, one of which is in the 2010s in Singapore, about a poor woman whose husband dies, and this boy who finds her, this boy who's lost his grandmother, and how those two come together. But it is the other part, which is set during World War II in Singapore during the Japanese occupation, that is really the bit that's about female friendships for me. It is about three women who are kidnapped by the Japanese army and taken into sexual slavery, and the horrific tragedy of that, which is only really the only comfort, the only thing they have to hold on to is their friendship with each other. This is a really harrowing, difficult book, but it is the friendship between three of the women who are taken as these comfort women by the Japanese that really has that bud of hope and allows these women to survive. Their friendship with one another, their relationship, the small things that they can do, their small acts of resistance, rebellion and comfort are the way that these women survive through this terrible tragedy. And so whilst it is definitely a very difficult book to read, it is not just a joyful friendship book. It talks about human connection, comfort, and how friendship can help people through even the most horrific things that can happen. And then finally, another one's about female relationships and how friendship can help you, and also about intergenerational friendship, is The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abby DeRay. This is set in Nigeria about a girl called Aduni who is sold as a wife because her family need the money, but when a tragedy strikes there, she has to flee and she gets sold into domestic servitude into another abusive family. And so again, this book is really, really a difficult read, but it is really a book that is all about women. The men, whilst they do participate in violence and act violence against these women, they are definitely at the peripheries. Ajuni's relationships with women, whether that is the other wives, in her first house she is the third wife, and there are two wives, one hates her and one with whom she forms this strong bond. And again, when she moves into this house, there is the woman of the house who is again hates her and is abusive towards her, but these other rich women with whom she makes friends, and the other girls who are house girls like her relationships with them. How We Disappeared explores sexism and abuse and classism in Nigeria, and the way that it displays the way that it portrays those different relationships is really powerful and important. Ajuni's relationships with women who are much older than her, or who are just slightly older than her, multiple different generations of women, are a really important key part of driving the plot and of Ajuni's own development from child into woman through her relationship with these other women. I think it's really well done. So if you felt like you would like to read a book about female friendship this Galentine's Day, I hope you can find a recommendation here. And if you just love books with female friendships, then I hope one of these will work for you. Thank you for watching. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and to let me know your favourite female friendship in literature in the comments, because I definitely want to add more books to my reading list with female friendships in them. Please remember to subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you again very soon, because I put out new videos every Wednesday, Friday and Sunday. Thank you for watching. Bye bye!